The numbers suggest that Western Kentucky is actually a solid team, but are they really, especially in comparison to the Kentucky Wildcats?
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, and on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be previewing Kentucky basketball's matchup with the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers. According to Ken Pom and according to the eye test, yeah, they're a pretty decent squad, but are they actually, especially in comparison to the Wildcats? Going to dive into the good. What do we know about the Hilltoppers? What have they done well this season? Going to dive into the bad. There are some hidden things about this team that you may not realize on the surface, and it's going to contribute in a major way when breaking down kind of how these two teams match up. And then to wrap up the show, going to have our two bi-weekly segment, I should say. Mark it down. I'll go ahead and play the little sticker here for you on YouTube if you're watching there. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can continue your season with a big return on FanDuel because new customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $150 in bonus bets if they win their first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Thank you guys so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. And if you are watching on YouTube, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribe to the show. And if you're listening on podcast, I would also appreciate it if you subscribed there as well. All right. Let's go ahead and get into it. Kentucky basketball looking to improve to 6-0 would be their best starting record since the 2016-17 season. Cats went 7-0 to start that year before a loss to UCLA, if I'm not mistaken. Wildcats taking on the 3-2 Western Kentucky Hilltoppers. As of this recording, Western Kentucky ranked 127th on Ken Pom. They are a pretty solid school, one of the better non-conference teams Kentucky will have faced this season. I have some bold predictions despite the fact that they are ranked as one of the better teams Kentucky has faced so far. I just don't know if Western Kentucky will be able to keep up with UK for a variety of reasons. But before we get to that, let's talk about what do we know about the Hilltoppers? What do we know about their team and kind of what do they do well? Well, to start, let's discuss their head coach, Hank Plona. In his first season, I believe that's how you pronounce his last name, in his first season as a Division I head coach. He started his career as a GA at Providence after getting his master's there. He was an assistant at Arkansas Fort Smith, then an assistant at Indian Hills Community College. He was an assistant at South Plains JUCO before becoming the head coach back at Indian Hills, and he was the head coach there from 2015 to 2023. He amassed a 225-35 record, won like 85% of his games, was a really, really good coach there. I believe won a title or got very close to doing so, winning his division there late in his tenure. Then he decided to resign from his position at Indian Hills Community College. He became an assistant at Western Kentucky in 2023. He was there as an assistant for one season. And then Steve Lutz, the former head coach of the Hilltoppers, was hired away at Oklahoma State. And just like that, Hank Plona finds himself as a Division I coach, coaching the Hilltoppers. So far this season, 3-2 are the Hilltoppers, with their best win being against Lipscomb, a team that Kentucky just beat. They beat them 66-61 in Bowling Green, Kentucky. They actually just played Jackson State as well last Wednesday, part of the Big Blue Nation Invitational. So Kentucky is the final stop here for the Hilltoppers in that Invitational, and they have been at different points this season, despite a couple of different losses to Wichita State and Grand Canyon. They've been putting up points, and that's kind of where I want to start the positives here. They are averaging right now 81 points per game. Now, we're going to dive into exactly kind of where they got those points later on in the show. There's something I'm intentionally not telling you here. But overall, the offense has been able to score. They are led by Don McHenry, who sounds like an 80s rock star. He's averaging 17.2 points per game. They've got a couple of other really solid pieces, one of which we'll break down in the second segment as the player to watch in this game as the biggest matchup. Once again, Kentucky going up against a player that is pretty solid in the front court, a big physical wing forward type. Can they handle the matchup? So far, they've been able to do just that, despite some better presences that they've seen down low. But McHenry is solid. The team is extremely balanced when it comes to distributing the ball. It's a really interesting team. They're very interesting in terms of experience and bench minutes. They're just balanced across the board when it comes to getting different guys involved outside of McHenry. It's an interesting squad. As a first-year head coach, you are going to expect some statistical struggles, right? You're going to go look at their KenPom page. You're going to go look at their ESPN page, wherever you want to go look and get your numbers. And you're going to see some things, some areas, a lot of different areas where they just flat out aren't performing. And that's okay. It's part of the process building towards something. It doesn't necessarily mean they're an incompetent product. I would argue against that and say Western Kentucky 3-2, they've looked pretty solid, especially considering, if you're comparing, rather, I should say, them to a couple of other teams that Kentucky has already faced. However, there are some holes. The final positive thing that I will say, and this is maybe the biggest thing here, is that their defense has not been too shabby. They are currently 75th in the nation in adjusted defensive efficiency. They are 56th in effective field goal percentage. They are 56th in three-point percentage at just 28%. That's what their opponents are shooting. Now, granted, they've played some really bad three-point shooting offenses. In fact, I can go over here to the opponent tracker and look at three-point shooting percentage. They have already faced 3 of the 8 worst shooting teams that they will face this season. Kentucky, obviously one of the best three-point shooting teams in the country, so it'll be interesting to see how those two things kind of clash against each other. But the offense is averaging over 80 points, and the defense is really good for a mid-major team. And they prevent rebounds, they create some turnovers, they play with a decent pace. There's not a ton here to really knock on the defensive side of the ball, but the offense is kind of where things get interesting. And that's kind of what I want to dive into further, preview a couple different players, one big player to watch down low before we continue our preview of Kentucky versus Western Kentucky. I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. You can get started with FanDuel today, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, to get started today, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if they win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, and it's all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your live bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. You never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, continuing along here on the Monday edition of Locked On Kentucky, Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Thank you guys so much for checking out the show today. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel or the podcast feed, I would greatly appreciate it if you did so. We are previewing Kentucky basketball's matchup with Western Kentucky. This team, pretty good according to KenPom, ranked 127th. I'll pull it back up here right now. Kentucky has faced off against the 138, 226, 4th, 131, and 336 best teams in the country according to those rankings. So this is technically the second best opponent that Kentucky has faced. It's actually hilarious. I've done all of these notes, and I've just pulled back up KenPom, and there are a couple of major numbers that have changed a couple different spots for Kentucky, which is hilarious. That's just kind of how things ebb and flow. By the way, if you're not watching the Maui Invitational over the course of the next couple days, you absolutely need to do it. It's going to be incredible. Feast week is one of the best weeks for college basketball of the season. I love it. The UConn-Memphis game, if you got to see that earlier today, what a barn burner. Really some questionable calls late, but it was still a phenomenal game nonetheless. Anyway, college basketball is good right now. Western Kentucky is going to be another really good game. So what to watch for here, that's kind of leaning towards the negative side. So we talked about the positive stuff, right? We talked about a new head coach, talked about his really strong record at his community college that he coached at for so long. He has moved up the ranks pretty quickly. Here he is coaching WKU against Kentucky. They've got a good defense. The offense, despite averaging 81 points per game, is one of the worst Kentucky has seen so far. In terms of adjusted efficiency, this team is 225th nationally. They are in the bottom third of the country in all of these statistics. Just walk with me here. It's essentially every single stat. Effective field goal percentage, turnover percentage, offensive rebound percentage, free throw attempts over field goal attempts, how often they get to the foul line, 2-point percentage, free throw percentage, block percentage, steal percentage, assists per field goals made, how much they distribute the ball. They are struggling in nearly every single statistical category. Almost all of it is bad. Minus 3-point shooting, which is average. If you go and look, they're shooting 33.3% from beyond the arc. And non-steal turnover percentage. Those are the only two stats that you can look at and say they're doing a good job in. And non-steal turnover percentage, if we're just talking about random numbers, that doesn't really matter if you're one of the worst teams in the nation and allowing steals to happen. If the ball gets stolen from you more than almost anyone in the country, it doesn't really matter that you don't have, if you have a low non-steal turnover percentage, because the turnovers are being created elsewhere. Like, you're not going to have any opportunities to just throw the ball out of bounds and not get stolen, you know? So it's a bad offense. They rank 13th in the country in tempo. In average possession length, they're 11th in adjusted tempo, I should say. So they're one of the fastest offenses in the nation. And it looks like, and I had to go and watch the Lipscomb game for myself because the entire game was on YouTube. I went and watched about half of it. Yeah, they like to get shots up quickly. And some of them are not the most efficient shots. Some of them are good shots taken by players that are just not executing very well. This is an offense that is only averaging 81 points per game because of the game that they played against an NAIA school. On November 12th, they played Campbellsville, an NAIA school. They scored 104 points. That is what is bringing up their averages. In their other games, they have scored 84, 72, 66, and 79. Yes, this offense still would have scored a decent chunk of points, but that 104-point victory, not margin, just total points, is doing a lot of heavy lifting here for their stats. I do not think that they are going to score more than 70 points in this game. Ken Pom thinks they're going to score 69. I don't think they're going to score more than 70 points in this game. I think Kentucky is going to be able to continue to do some of the things that they've done really well defensively in this matchup. Now, there are a couple of other interesting stats here that one of them I posted to Twitter that we'll talk about in the Market Down segment, just something I want you guys to be aware of. But for this matchup, they don't have a ton of really good shooters, just flat out. And the only front court presence that they have that I'm concerned about does not shoot very well, and that's Babacar, I believe it's Faye. Babacar Faye was at College of Charleston for a couple of years, if I'm not mistaken, before transferring to Western Kentucky. This is the best start that he's had, averaging 15 points per game, almost 8 rebounds, a block per game, but he's only shooting 48% from the floor as a 6'8" big. He is their starting five. He's not shooting more than 50% as the center, and that's just simply not very good. He is the presence that I am most concerned about in this game, though. He's the player to watch. He grabs rebounds. He plays decent defense. He's physical, but his shot selection is just not very good. The fact that he's been able to get to 15 points per game so far this season is, I believe, largely due in part to the fact that they just play with so much tempo, and they create a couple different turnovers on defense, and it gives them more possessions to put shots up. This is kind of what we talked about a lot last season when it came to Kentucky and tempo and how they manage their offense. Their defense gave up more points despite being statistically because of the fact that they played so fast on offense. It just gave their opponent more possessions. Jalen Jackson, outside of Babacar Faye and Don McHenry, is the only other player that I look at and I say I am interested to see how Kentucky matches up here. Jalen Jackson is a sixth-year player. He played at North Texas for 2 years. He played at Texas A&M Corpus Christi for 2 years. He's now here at Western Kentucky. He's averaging 3 assists per game. He's the only player on the roster to average more than 1.8 assists per contest. He got hit the third start of the season against Jackson State. Keep in mind, we're 5 games in. He's only started 3 games. He got the start last contest. If he starts here, and he is essentially the only, noticeable assist man on this team, if Kentucky shuts him down, what does the offense really do? How do they consistently score points? Because, again, the roster is extremely balanced when it comes to distributing the ball. There are 8 different players here that average between 1 and 1.8 assists per game. Jackson's the only player that averages more. So, will they be able to find enough outside of him through this conglomerate of players who kind of all distribute the ball? Or if they take Jackson out, is it just kind of okay, we're left with this relatively mediocre ability to distribute the ball, and there's just not a ton of points to be found, especially when you consider the fact that they don't shoot well, they don't grab rebounds, they turn the ball over a ton. It's not a good offense. Will Kentucky's speed kind of allow them to make some mistakes in this game? There's a chance that could happen. There is absolutely a chance that could happen. But I'm not banking on it. I think Kentucky will continue to play well defensively in this game. I think they will lock in. I think they will execute. This is kind of what we've said for several years on the show. At Western Kentucky, which, by the way, I do want to say this. Hank Plona, in his first year, is still projected to have a winning record, both overall and in conference play. He's going to have something going on here. He's going to beat a decent amount of teams in Conference USA. Western Kentucky's going to be a decent squad. They're probably going to be even better as he gets more time there. But against a team like Kentucky, who is arguably the best team on their schedule, when they've got teams like Michigan and Liberty coming up past the Wildcats, Kentucky's bigger, they're faster. I think that they have a leg up when it comes to coaching just because of where Mark Pope is currently in his career and the offense that he runs. It's at home. Everything points to a Kentucky victory. If Kentucky somehow finds a way to lose this game and they get upset, we'll talk about it. We'll break it down. We'll explain why a collapse happened, right? Sometimes upsets happen. But on paper, the Wildcats should not lose this game. Anybody would agree with that. I don't think that Western Kentucky scores more than 70. I don't think they score more than 65. I think they score maybe somewhere between 60 to 65, 64 points, somewhere between there. And I think Kentucky will scrape 90. I'm going to go 90-63. Let's say 90 to 63. That'll be my projection for this contest. I think the Wildcats are going to be able to do enough on both sides of the ball. I don't think that Western Kentucky's three-point defense is as legitimate as it looks statistically because they played a bunch of really poor shooting teams. Kentucky plays well in transition. Kentucky will shoot threes. Kentucky will be aggressive. They are just simply an overall better team. Again, Kentucky has not been 6-0 or better since the start of the 2016-17 season. They should get there tonight. That is my prediction. Let me know what you think in the comments below. What are your score predictions? Who do you think is going to be the most important player in the game? Let me know if you're watching on YouTube. You can leave a comment there. If you're listening on podcast, at Locked On UK on Twitter is where you can find me and give your thoughts there. All right, we're gonna wrap up the show with a segment that I started last weekend called Mark It Down. Going to give you my hot takes and predictions for the upcoming week. Going to give a hot prediction, hot take. Man, I can't talk. Hot take for this game here tonight about Kentucky really clamping down on the defensive side of the ball. Before we get to that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at Game Time. Game Time is the place that you need to go. If you're looking to get tickets to this game against Western Kentucky, or any home game for Rupp Arena, you need to go to Game Time. It is the place to go to get tickets to your favorite events. It's not just college basketball, college football. You can go to MLB games whenever they start back up in the spring. You can go to NBA games, NFL games. You can also go to concerts, theater, any event near you. You can find the tickets over on Game Time. They also have this new thing called Game Time Picks. It's curation that makes it easier to save more on sports. like concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. They've got the lowest price guarantee. They've got seat views before you buy. I've used them for several years now, going to different college football and basketball events, and it is so easy to get a deal that I want, that I like. I can get in and out of the app. I can see where I'm sitting. I can get the tickets. I can share them with my friends. Super, super quick, super, super easy. And you can take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Game Time Picks by downloading the Game Time app, creating an account, and using code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, wrapping up the Monday edition of Locked On Kentucky, previewing Kentucky basketball versus Western Kentucky, and we're going to round out the show here with, you guessed it, Mark It Down. I absolutely love that little stamp on YouTube if you watch it there. I'm sure you can hear it on podcast. I find great joy in that. All right, so we started, I should say, and we previewed Kentucky's next two upcoming games on Friday with Mark It Down by predicting that Kentucky basketball at the end of that two-game stint would be inside the top 30 nationally in adjusted defensive efficiency. As of today, they sit at 29th. Before I hit record, they were 31st. So this Western Kentucky game will essentially be the deciding factor of whether or not that stays true, and my hot take is correct. And Kentucky was like 36th or something like that whenever I made that prediction. Anyway, Mark It Down. Going to play it again because I feel like it. Mark It Down. This will be the lowest field goal percentage a Kentucky opponent has all season. And I know what I said after the Jackson State game. I said that this was probably going to be the lowest shooting percentage that any opponent had against the Cats. No, I think it will be this game. Jackson State shot 19% from three. They shot 39.6% from inside the arc. I think that this will be the worst game for a couple of reasons. First of all, as we just previously stated, Western Kentucky's offense is not very good. They are 234th in effective field goal percentage, and they cannot finish at the rim. They have struggled mightily to do so. I do not think that they are going to be able to shoot extremely well against Kentucky from three. I don't think they have enough pieces to do that. Who knows? I may be wrong, but this is my prediction. This is hot take. This is Mark It Down. But you can mark it down. This is going to be the best defensive performance that Kentucky has this season, period. This is the fourth worst offense Kentucky will see in terms of efficiency this season. This is the fourth worst out of like 30 games. This is it. I think they will clamp down. I think they will hold Western Kentucky to a very low percentage at the rim. Maybe three-point shooting makes up for that a little bit, but it's still going to be the worst. That is my prediction. You can mark it down. As we wrap up the show today, I want you guys to be aware of something in relation to this three-point shooting. And it's something that I tweeted about earlier today. This is a fascinating stat about Kentucky basketball. So you guys know the defense has actually been pretty dang solid to start the year. They're 16th in effective field goal percentage. They have the third best three-point defense in the nation. Kentucky does right now. It's really, really, really good. Here's your number. Here are your numbers, and we'll stop talking about stats. The Wildcats defense currently allows the second most field goal attempts in the country at 69.6. Only one team in the nation defensively gives up more shot attempts in the country. Kentucky is only allowing 66 points per game, and they are 38th nationally in opponent field goal percentage. Almost 70 field goal attempts per game, and yet Kentucky's opponents are shooting 37% from the floor. I want you guys to be aware of something. We talked about this a little bit when we discussed Clemson and Gonzaga and Louisville and Ohio State to close out the non-con. You are not going to be able to keep that up. You are going to find opponents who finish well at the rim, and they don't do what Duke did in the second half, which is fall apart. They will continue to dominate you. I'm looking specifically at the Florida game to open SEC play. If Kentucky doesn't get a rude awakening against Gonzaga, they may get a rude awakening against Florida, who's currently in the top 15 in two-point field goal percentage. You're not going to be able, I don't think, to keep this up. It'll be very hard to do so, to give up so many shots and for your opponents to just continue to miss. It felt like so many times last season, it felt like teams were putting up shots that could have gone in, could have not, and the opponents were hitting them way more often than they should. And then we got angry at Kentucky's defense. This team does not foul a ton, they don't put teams on the line, and they don't give up points in the half court. We'll see if it continues, but the numbers suggest otherwise. Conference play could be rough if that starts to trend in a dramatically negative direction. Or you could kind of maintain where you're at and the field goal attempts drop because maybe as conference play hits, you play a little slower. Who knows? I'm just projecting here, but what I do know is that cannot stay the same. There is almost no way that stays the same, for better or for worse. Just something to be aware of. Games like this against Western Kentucky, hey, I expect us to play well. If they play well, do not take it for granted. That's all I got to say. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnUK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDawe_ and follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.